Hello everyone and welcome to the first ever episode of Talking Racing Nonsense with Liam Ploetner. I'm your host Liam Ploetner, and today we're going to be talking about Fernando Alonso moving to Aston Martin, Sebastian Vettel announcing his retirement from Formula 1, and also the Hungarian Grand Prix. Now there won't be any IndyCar review or Formula E review, as I did not watch either race because IndyCar wasn't on TV and I didn't have the time to watch Formula E. So let's start off, of course, with today's news, and also there will be History Corner later on in the episode. But we're going to start off with today's news, which is that Fernando Alonso has announced that he will be moving from Alpine to Aston Martin for the 2023 F1 season on a multi-year deal, meaning that as things stand, he will be in Formula 1 up until the 2020, at least the end of the 2024 season, because multi-years is more than 1 year, so you kind of assume it's a 2-year deal, because surely they wouldn't go with 3 years. So this means that Fernando Alonso has signed for Aston Martin because Sebastian Vettel has retired at the end of the season. And this is a very interesting call because Fernando Alonso is currently driving for arguably the fourth quickest team on the grid in Alpine, and has a car which, if Mercedes or Ferrari or Red Bull screw up, could be potentially on the podium. And yet he's moving to a team which is struggling for points this season in Aston Martin. Is this a typical Alonso bad luck move, such as when he moved from McLaren to Renault and McLaren ended up winning the championship the following year? Or could it be a stroke of genius? Well, we'll see, time will tell. But what I find interesting is that Alpine didn't renew his contract, and I believe they deliberately didn't renew his contract because they wanted to have Oscar Piastri in the seat instead of Alonso. I wonder, did they actually offer Alonso to Aston Martin, or did they just decide not to renew his contract? I think they might have offered Alonso to Aston Martin to give Piastri the seat. And this has all come since Sebastian Vettel's announced his retirement from Formula 1. I was not surprised when I heard he announced his retirement. I woke up one morning, went on my phone, found out Seb had retired. I was sad, really sad, because he's been a role model of mine for many years. But I had a feeling it was going to happen. Whereas with this move, I was not expecting Fernando Alonso to move to Aston Martin. I was expecting him to renew his deal with Alpine. So that means that about half the seats are confirmed on the grid, and I think it's pretty obvious what the rest of the seats are going to be. So AlphaTauri still have a seat left. Alfa Romeo have 1 seat left, Williams have 2, and Alpine have 1, I believe, because Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren, one of the Alpine seats, both the Aston Martin seats, one of the Alfa Romeo seats, one of the AlphaTauri seats, and there's definitely a team I'm missing, and one of the Haas seats is confirmed, so, and Mick Schumacher's not signed up yet. I think what's going to happen is, Mick Schumacher's going to remain at Haas, and unless Theo Pourchaire wins F2 this year, which I don't think he will, Drugovich is too far ahead, Zhou Guanyu will still be at Alfa Romeo next year, and I believe that Logan Sargent will be teammates with Alex Albon next year at Williams, because I don't think Nicholas Latifi will stay, because Darlington have got money behind them. So they don't need his money anymore. Plus Sargent might bring a bunch of American sponsors. Piastri will get the Alpine seat. That's kind of self-explanatory, really. He's a reserve driver. He won Formula 3 and Formula 2 as a rookie. He has probably as much talent in him as Charles Leclerc and George Russell, as they both emulated this as well by winning F3 and F2 in their rookie seasons. And I think that he has a lot of talent and a lot of potential, but it's a risky move because they are dropping someone who's been in fine form in Fernando Alonso and hiring a youngster to replace him. So it's very, very interesting. And then we've got the Haas seat. I think Mick Schumacher's been performing well recently. He's almost got the same amount of points as Kevin Magnussen. If I just look at the championship standings right now, I'm pretty sure he's only a couple of points behind K-Mag in the championship now. Considering at the start of the season, he had no points, to then be fighting for points consistently after that British Grand Prix where he broke his points duck. I think since then he's had a confidence boost, and he's starting to become the Mick Schumacher that we saw in the feeder series, where he was incredible. You know, I remember that Monza start in 2020 where he went from 7th to 2nd in one corner and ended up winning the race in the end. And yeah, looking at the championship standings, he's 10 points behind K-Mag, so to be fair, he hasn't collected as many points as I thought he had, but I think he'll keep the seat for next season. I'm surprised that Wikipedia haven't actually that people haven't made a 2023 F1 season page yet, because half the seats are already confirmed. So, but anyway, enough about Wikipedia. So yeah, that's interesting. And then we have obviously the Hungarian Grand Prix itself. Now that was an eventful race and a half. I obviously broadcasted it live on my YouTube. Go check that out if you haven't already. And it was very, very, very interesting. So obviously Max Verstappen started 10th on the grid, and yet somehow Ferrari screwed up again and won the race. Ferrari finished only 4th and 6th, which is absolutely shocking. Here is just some of the stuff that has been said. Former F1 driver Anthony Davidson said that improvements need to be made in reference to Ferrari's strategy. Ted Kravitz called the strategy baffling, and a reporter called Ferrari's strategy team the worst. And then Alex Brundle said that the hard tyres made absolutely zero sense. And as a result, Ferrari screwing up, Mercedes got their second double podium in a row, with Lewis Hamilton finishing 2nd and George Russell finishing 3rd. And then in 10th place, Sebastian Vettel got his got more points for the another point for the Aston Martin team as they get closer to AlphaTauri. He'll be happy with that. Alpine have not lost anything to McLaren and not gained anything, because Lando Norris picked up 6 points by himself. Daniel Ricciardo finished down 15th, shockingly, and Fernando Alonso and Esteban Ocon finished 8th and 9th, giving them a combined total of 6 points. Red Bull have pulled away even more. Max Verstappen's nearly world champion already, unless he has horrible reliability at the end of the season, which I doubt he will, because that Red Bull has been very strong on its reliability this season. So I'm expecting him to just dominate the rest of the season like Sebastian Vettel did in 2013, because I can just see that happening. I do not see Charles Leclerc staying in this title fight. I think Mercedes actually have a better chance of the title than Ferrari do. Look at the Constructors' Championship and look at how close Mercedes is to Ferrari, and look how much they've closed up. They're only 30 points behind Ferrari. Now, after Austria, the gap between Mercedes and Ferrari was 66 points. Now, that total has halved. In 2 race weekends, it has halved. Now, if Mercedes continue this form, they're in the title fight, or in the fight for second with Ferrari, and Red Bull are walking away with this. But if Ferrari get a new strategy team, they might just have a slightly better chance. But that's me sort of doing a little review of Austria, of Hungary. Valtteri Bottas actually got his first retirement of the season, and 19 cars actually finished the race, surprisingly. 20 cars technically were counted as finishing, and this is one of the only times in F1 history that this has actually happened. But it was still a very interesting race. Sergio Perez didn't have a very good race. He finished in 5th behind Ferrari of Carlos Sainz. Yeah, Ferrari just massively screwed up. If Charles Leclerc wants to win a world championship, which he has the ability to, we've all seen it, then he needs to move to Mercedes or somewhere else, because that is the only place, or either that or Red Bull, because he is not going to win with Ferrari. But let's go to History Corner now. So I'm gonna actually, for next week's episode, I'm gonna make a poll. Hopefully people will comment on it, and it'll be, what decade should I talk about? So in this one, I'll just talk about how Formula One came about, basically. So, so basically, cars were invented in the 1880s. Carl Benz, yeah. Sorry. Carl Benz came up with the invention of cars, and the first time a car was ever driven was when his wife drove his machine to give their friends some milk, which is weird, but that's how the story goes apparently. And over the years it started to evolve, a bit like just how our world has, basically. And by 1906, racing had started. The first ever Grand Prix, or as we call it, or as they say in English, Grand Prize, was held in 1906 in France, and it was won by Ferenc Szijs. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right. I'll have to just check how you pronounce this dude's name, because it is hella difficult to say that name. I'm just checking. How do you say this? Ferenc Szijs? I can't say it, but anyway, he won it ahead of Felice Nazzaro, who was actually one of the main inspirations for Enzo Ferrari, and a guy called Albert Clement was third. So Renault actually won their home race, and it was at Le Mans, and this was when motor racing started to become bigger and bigger. And one of the guys who actually drove in that race was a guy called Vincenzo Florio, and he invented the Targa Florio, which was one of the most famous races at that time. And there was other drivers like Alessandro Cagno, and Louis Wagner, who also raced in that race. But by the 1920s, there were guys such as Antonio Ascari that were winning races and competing. And there was a whole Grand Prix season, basically. They called it the Grand Prix season, like I said. And there were races in France and Germany and the UK and Italy, a couple in America. And some of the drivers that won the championship included the likes of Felice Nazzaro. He won races. And one of the guys who actually was a test driver was Alfred Neubauer, who later became the owner of the Mercedes team. Henry Seagrave was another great driver at that time. He was in his early 20s when he started doing very well. Like I said, Antonio Ascari was a very good driver when he was racing. And then another driver was Giuseppe Campari, who was good friends with Enzo Ferrari. Enzo was racing at this point as well. He won a couple of races every now and then. And it properly started in 1925. This was when it all started, the Teams Championship. And how the point system worked was if you competed in the race and finished, but weren't on the podium, you'd pick up 4 points. If you didn't finish the race, you'd get 5 points. If you didn't even participate in the race, you'd get 6. If you won, you'd get 1 point. If you were second, you'd get 2 points. And if you were bronze, you'd get 3 points. And the reason why they did it like this was because if you didn't participate in a race, you were punished for it. And you know what? I totally get why they did that. Although if you didn't compete and you were allowed to drop 1 score from the season. So for all the teams that didn't compete at Indy, that was who they could drop. But in the end, Alfa Romeo won it by 4 points from Duesenberg, and the reason for that was because Duesenberg didn't compete in France. So, but some of the winners that year, I've got it down with me, were the race winners were guys like Antonio Ascari and Albert Devo. I actually don't recognise quite a lot of the names here. Carlo Massetti won a couple of races as well. And it was very even. The following year, because Alfa Romeo won in 1925 and 1926, Bugatti won it. And that was because they competed in all but one race, and that was the Indianapolis 500 that they didn't compete in. Jules Gu won a few races for Bugatti. He won 2. And Emilio Martirazzi won a race for Maserati. And then there were guys like Fernando Alonso, Malcolm Campbell, Louis Wagner, and Louis Chiron that were competing at this time. Of course, Louis Chiron was still racing 25 years later in Formula 1. And Robert Benoit, he was a very good driver back in those days as well. But 1927 was the year Tazio Nuvolari started racing, and he was very good. But he finished second basically in the championship that year, in the de facto championship. But the man who won it was Louis Chiron, and there were races in Italy, France, and Spain that year, in America, but no one really counted that. And it was a very, very interesting championship. Achille Varzi then won the following year. He ended up, he won in 1929, and he ended up winning the first ever Formula 1 race. Not the actual race, but it was in 1946. And there was another guy called William Grover Williams, who was also a very good driver. He won he won the Monaco Grand Prix, the first ever Monaco Grand Prix. And it was around about this time that a young German fella called Rudolf Caracciola started racing. And he was, needless to say, one of the best drivers of all time. So him and Tazio Nuvolari, they were sort of the biggest drivers later on. But at this point, there was the biggest drivers were René Dreyfus, Achille Varzi, and Louis Chiron. And another driver who started doing well was Luigi Fagioli. So at this point, you had guys like Campari, Fagioli, and Nuvolari and Caracciola, who were competing. But they had started winning later on down the line. At this point, the guys who were already winning were Varzi and Chiron, and these two were still racing after the war ended. But then they properly started doing a drivers' championship, and it was between him and Campari for who won it. And technically, Minoaya won it because he competed more distance. But under the current regulations of Formula 1, the driver who would have won it would have been Campari because he won a race and Minoaya didn't. But then you've also got, down the order, you've got 4th place, Tazio Nuvolari, and these guys were all driving for Alfa. And then you had Achille Varzi and Louis Chiron, who both drove for Bugatti, and they were one combined entry. And then further down the order, you had René Dreyfus, and right at the bottom, you had Rudolf Caracciola, because he only did one race, and as a result, he lost a lot of points, because as I said, if you didn't do a race, you lost a lot of points. And then the following year, this was when Tazio Nuvolari started to do well. He won two of the 3 races that year, and Caracciola took the last one, so Alfa Romeo finished 1, 2, 3 in the championship. And Louis Chiron drove for Bugatti, and that was why the Bugatti, which was made nearly 100 years later, was named after him. Not 100, 80, 85, 90 years after that, was named after him. Raymond Sommer was another driver who was quite interesting. Basically, they had loads of races, but only a couple of them counted towards the World Championship. So some races Mercedes won, some races Alfa Romeo won, some races Bugatti won. It was a very, very interesting dynamic, because some races Caracciola would win, some of them William Grover Williams would win, some of them Chiron, some of them Raymond Sommer, some of them Nuvolari. There was so many good drivers that were around back then, and because of the amount of variety that they had in who raced, there was loads of different drivers who did well. But in this season, Nuvolari won again, and the guy who got closest to him was Chiron. And these two were teammates, and they were driving for a team that would end up becoming very, very famous in Formula 1, and that was a team by the name of Scuderia Ferrari. And down the order, in around about 10th place was a young Algerian guy called Guy Moll, and he had a lot of potential. However, unfortunately, he lost his life in an accident. He was a fantastic young driver. He probably would have done well in Formula 1 when it was invented. And And it was at this point that the German Nazi government started to fund the racing campaigns at the time, the auto unions and the Mercedes-Benz. And this was why Maserati and Alfa Romeo and Bugatti couldn't keep up with them, because of the amount of spending that they were doing on cars. And this was when Alfred Neubauer became the head of the Mercedes program, and Mercedes got guys such as Manfred von Brauchitsch, Bernd Rosemeyer, Rudolf Caracciola, and guys like that, and they were the catalysts of the era. Those guys, and Hermann Lang, and also of course Tazio Nuvolari and Giuseppe Campari. But Campari passed away in 1933 following an accident, so he wasn't around just before the war. And in the end, Mercedes actually had a guy called Richard Seaman who drove for them. He was a British driver. Josh Ravel made a video on him. He was a British driver who ended up racing for a German team, and this is when tensions in Europe were rising. So he ended up in a tricky spot. But I have to say the most skilled year from about since 1906 until about 1935 was 1934. Because the top, you could recognise the top 9 in the championship. The driver who won it was Hans Stuck. Of course, his son Hans Joachim Stuck ended up becoming a Formula 1 driver in the 60s and 70s. Hans actually drove in Formula 1 a couple times in the 50s. Then second place was Luigi Fagioli, and keeping in mind these Stuck won for Auto Union, now called Audi, and Fagioli won for Mercedes, and he finished second for Mercedes. And then you had 3 Ferrari drivers, or Alfa Romeo drivers is what they were basically, but the division was called Scuderia Ferrari, and it was Guy Moll, who, like I said, was a very talented young driver, lost far too soon from Algeria. Louis Chiron, he was a brilliant driver, and Achille Varzi. And then a bit further down the order, you had guys like Tazio Nuvolari, Rudolf Caracciola, René Dreyfus, and near the back, you had Jean-Pierre Vermeil, who was one of the best drivers of his generation. And then this was when Juan Manuel Fangio started racing, just before the war. And there was guys such as him. There was also Jean-Pierre Vermeil, Piero Taruffi, who ended up becoming a Formula 1 race winner in 1951, Paul Pietsch, who lived to be 100, Philippe Tanslin, who was statistically the oldest ever Formula 1 driver. He was born in 1898. And then right at the top you had Rudolf Caracciola and Luigi Fagioli. And whilst these guys were the ones that were on top, it was Tazio Nuvolari who really was the best driver of this generation, because he was in less superior cars, and yet he won a few races. Particularly the 1935 German Grand Prix was famous because he beat the Germans on their home soil. And keeping in mind that that Adolf Hitler was the head of the Mercedes and Audi programs, and he was getting ready to get the German national anthem ready, but as it turns out, it didn't go that way. If he wasn't Italian, he probably would not have been very happy, but he was Italian, so I think he let him off, because of course him and Mussolini were buddies, but that's an entirely different conversation. So then you had 1936, and a new driver came up, and I mentioned him before, but it was Bernd Rosemeyer, and he was a very, very quick driver. His son ended up being born after he passed away. So Rosemeyer was him and Caracciola were rivals. They were both very talented rivals, but Bernd Rosemeyer dominated the season. If he hadn't DNF'd in Monaco, he would have won by a landslide. The top drivers were, at the time, most of them were German, similar to that of the 2000s. when you had Michael Schumacher, Ralf Schumacher, Sebastian Vettel, and these guys were the catalysts and the inspirations for drivers such as Wolfgang von Trips, and of course Hans Joachim Stuck, because his dad was racing at that time, and he saw his dad as an idol, obviously. So yeah, the top 5 in the championship, barring Raymond Sommer, was Italian and German. And the reason for this was because they were the teams that were getting the most investment, and these were the teams that had the best drivers, because they could pay for the best drivers. The Frenchmen were down the order because they didn't have as much money as the Germans and the Italians did. So that was why they were better. And it was at this time that the Nazi government were making a lot of money from the programs, because Mercedes were winning everything because they had the technology to win. And Caracciola dominantly won the title in 1937, and this was when it started to go a little bit suspicious, because obviously this was when they started to work on the navy and and also on their Air Force, and this was when it started to get very controversial. And there was like I said, Richard Seaman was a guy who was British, and he drove for a German team, and his mother didn't support his decision because the team was associated with Nazism. He ended up marrying a German lady, the daughter of one of the BMW bigwigs, and he ended up winning a few races in 1938, but thankfully didn't see himself in the situation that he was with the Germans during the war. I think he would have been very thankful that, because he passed away in 1939, a couple of months before Germany invaded Poland. But yeah, in this time, Enzo Ferrari decided to quit the Alfa Romeo team, and they did much worse. And it was the same faces that were doing well. Caracciola won like 4 or 5 championships. Von Brauchitsch and Lang were still pretty high up in the order. So was Nuvolari, so was Stuck. And Giuseppe Farina started racing around about this time as well. And then and this was in 1938. And then the final season was in 1939. And Hermann Paul Müller won the championship. He won on with motorbikes and in cars. He won the 250 championship on motorbikes. So technically, John Surtees isn't the only driver to have won on 2 and 4 wheels, but this was before Formula 1, so technically it doesn't count. Hermann Lang would have won the championship if he didn't have such bad reliability, but it was Hermann Paul Müller that won the championship in the end. And then war happened, and the season was stopped. So then it was at this point that all racing activity was stopped, and the countries that were competing in the racing, so for Britain it was Jaguar, ERA, for France it was Talbot and Bugatti, for Italy it was Maserati and Alfa Romeo, then there was Scuderia Ferrari, and for Germany it was Auto Union and Mercedes, and they all went to war with each other. It was Italy and Germany against France and Britain, just like it was in the cars, basically. And obviously Germany lost in the end, so did Italy, and to be fair, no one really won the war, because it affected everyone so much. But after the war, racing resumed, and then Formula 1 was invented. But that's going to be sort of the end of this episode of Talking Racing Nonsense. I really was talking racing nonsense there. I just went on and on and on. So yeah, it's a bit like the character in Airplane. I forgot his name. whenever he talks about a lane, he loses all track of time, and it's really boring. But yeah, thank you all very much for watching. Fernando Alonso, according to Will from FP1, has early stages of. Nah, I can't say that. I'll get cancelled. I'm quoting someone else when I say this. Go subscribe to Will FP1 because he's very funny. But he said Fernando Alonso has moved to Aston Martin, and he's because of it he's getting signs of early onset vascular dementia. I'm gonna get cancelled for saying that, but it wasn't me that said it. It was Will. So I'm just saying that right now. It was a very, very interesting, very funny video. Go check that out. Max Verstappen, he's already won the title, and there's not really much more I have to say. So thank you all for watching. I've been Liam Ploetner, and I will see you all next week. Thank you all very much for listening. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Talking Racing Nonsense podcast. I'm your host Liam Ploetner, and if you're wondering why there weren't any episodes in the last 2 weeks, last week there was hardly anything on. And 2 weeks ago, I was basically trying to recover from the MotoGP. So, let's start off very quickly with, of course, the big news in the last couple of weeks, which is obviously the Oscar Piastri contract, controversy. So, Oscar Piastri was supposed to be getting signed by Alpine for the 2023, I should say, Formula 1 season. However, McLaren have decided otherwise and look as though they're going to be the ones to actually sign him, because Williams seems unlikely to do so. And in news related to that, Logan Sargent is set to participate in a practice session for Williams at the American Grand Prix, the US Grand Prix at COTA, and he is not the only driver to be getting a slot in for a practice session at his home race, as Antonio Giovinazzi is set to return to Formula 1, doing 2 practice sessions for Haas, one of which is going to be at his home Grand Prix at Monza. So that's very interesting news. And to be honest, there ain't much more F1 news apart from that. Of course, since the last episode, which was 2 weeks ago. But now we are going to move on to the race reports, and we've got 2 race reports and also a little bit of news from NASCAR as well, because Kimi Räikkönen and Danny Kvyat, of course, both decided this weekend to race at Watkins Glen in the NASCAR Cup Series, and Räikkönen ran as high as 9th at one point and was running in the top 10 before he unfortunately got taken out of the race following a collision. So hopefully Kimi will be coming back to NASCAR, because that'll get more European viewers in. I don't watch NASCAR, I think it's pretty dull, personally speaking, but that's just my opinion. Americans, don't hate me, please. And in IndyCar, now that is another American racing series which I will absolutely watch. It was a fascinating race in St. Louis, Missouri, as in the end Joseph Newgarden won for Team Penske ahead of surprisingly Lithuanian-American rookie David Malukas, who had an absolutely fantastic drive, finishing in an incredible 2nd place. And 3rd was Scott McLaughlin. So heading into the final 2 rounds of the season, 7 drivers can still win the championship, and those 7 drivers are Joseph Newgarden, Scott McLaughlin and Will Power from Team Penske, Pato O'Ward from McLaren from Arrow McLaren SP, and then from Chip Ganassi Racing, Scott Dixon, Marcus Ericsson and Alex Palou. So those are the 7 drivers that can still win the championship, and this is incredible because, you know, there hasn't been an IndyCar fight this close in 20 years, which is incredible. And, you know, we could get our first Swedish champion in 20 years, we could get Will Power finally getting that 2nd title, Scott Dixon getting his 7th, Pato O'Ward getting his 1st, Alex Palou getting his 2nd. You know, a lot of different things could happen in the last few rounds. Joseph Newgarden could get his 3rd championship, McLaughlin could get his 1st, becoming, I believe, the only driver to win V8 Supercars and IndyCar, and with the same team technically as well, because he drives for Penske in that. He drove for Penske in V8 Supercars, Dick Johnson Racing Penske. as it was known as back then. And yeah, I think that out of all the drivers, I think Will Power's got the most consistency. I think he's going to win the title. Of course, we've still got Laguna Seca, and I'm trying to remember what the last race is. Is it Sonoma? I'll need to go and check actually right now who the last driver is. Let me just quickly what the last race is, I should say. It is so it's Portland. I thought it was Portland, and then Laguna Seca. Those are the final 2 rounds of the season, and at the moment, Will Power leads the championship, and I think he's going to stay there. It's only a 3-point gap between him and Joseph Newgarden, and top 5 is separated by approximately 43 points. Now, in Formula 1, that would be still mathematically possible, but then I think at Pato O'Ward, it becomes impossible to win the title in F1. But in IndyCar, the point system is completely different. I believe you get 50 points for winning, even if you retire from the race, you still get points technically. So even finishing near the bottom is counts towards it. And of course, like David Malukas, like I said, he got a podium. He becomes the second rookie to do this season, after Christian Lundgaard got a podium at the IMS Motor Speedway road course. IMS Motor Speedway, IMS road course, I should say. IMS stands for Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Sorry about that, guys. Got a bit muddled in my brain there. Happens to the best of us. But yeah, that was the IndyCar. Sort of the IndyCar covered. Of course, it was a very interesting race. Like I said, there was a red flag due to the wet weather, and as a result, the race was red flagged. I actually fell asleep while waiting for the restart. So I didn't see the end of the race. I mean, I know someone who stayed up until 4:11 a.m. Shout out to James NS. Go check him out on YouTube. Very good YouTuber, very nice guy as well. But yeah, it's been one interesting week in racing, because the MotoGP was also on at the Österreich or the A1 ring, or the Red Bull ring, and of course there was that chicane that was added for the MotoGP, and I have to say it was much better than I thought it would be. And there's one big difference, I'd say, between that and the last round at Silverstone, and that is the attendance rates. I was at the British Grand Prix, and the atmosphere was not that great in comparison to the year before. I mean, if you look at the attendance rates, I'm looking at them now, you can safely say that the Austrian attendance rates were much bigger than that of the British. It says right here that the attendance rate was 100,000 for the MotoGP, whereas for the British Grand Prix, for the Austrian Grand Prix, but for the British Grand Prix, it was only 40,000, which is ridiculously small. I mean, yeah, I don't think I need to say much more. But of course, in the MotoGP, it was Enea Bastianini that was on pole position. He didn't get a good start, and at the end of the first lap, Bagnaia was leading, and it was basically a typical Ducati-owned race until Bastianini and Martin both encountered their own little problems. The only person that could light a candle to them was Fabio Quartararo, and someone who really fell back during the race was Alicia Spargaro. He really fell back as the race went on, and unfortunately ended up finishing much further down than he probably could have if he hadn't had those issues. He must have had a problem. Yeah, what I was going to say was in terms of Fabio Quartararo, I don't think the title fight's over just yet, but based on his form, who knows? I think he could do well. I think he could win the title, but I'm not sure. I mean, the gap at the moment between him and Alicia Spargaro is 32 points, sorry. And it's a really tricky one to call, because Aleix Espargaro is a consistent rider, but he's got good machinery, of course, but not as good a machinery as Bagnaia. And in Quartararo's hands, the Yamaha bike is very good, but not in anyone else's. You know, Morbidelli has scored almost a tenth of the amount of points that Fabio scored. Give it a few more races and he would have scored a tenth of the amount of points Fabio scored, which just shows how tailored that bike is to Fabio Quartararo. Just like with Marc Marquez and Yamaha back in the day. Not Yamaha, Honda. I keep making mistakes. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to look at the charts and how things look, etc. I'm not focusing enough. I'm sorry. But yeah, in the MotoGP, Quartararo started fifth, and he started to make progress up the field, and he managed to get past Bastianini, because Bastianini ended up retiring from the race due to a problem with the bike. I think it must have been a brake problem, and then Quartararo managed to catch up to Miller and Martin, because at this point the top five was Bagnaia, Miller, Martin, Quartararo, and was it Zarco or Aleix? I don't remember who it was. I don't remember if it was Aleix or Johan. I'll have to check. I'll just having a look at it now. I think it would have been Aleix probably, and then Fabio got past Martin, and then a brilliant move from Fabio on Jack Miller got him up to second place, but he couldn't get past Jack for a few laps, and as a result he wasn't able to catch up to Bagnaia quickly enough for him to win the race. He was the quickest rider out there. Actually no, I'd say Luca Marini was the quickest rider out there, because he had a brilliant race. Both VR46 bikes had much better races than they did qualifying sessions, and I have to say Luca Marini was probably my rider of the day, because he had a fantastic ride. He started 13th, ended up finishing in 4th, and was really quick. He was quicker than Zarco, quicker than Espargaro, but Espargaro had issues, like I said, so he was lucky to even hold on to 6th place. But yeah, Bagnaia gains 5 points on Quartararo. If he just keeps doing this the rest of the season, even then he's not going to catch up to him. You know, there is still another 7 races to go, I should say, and anything can happen in 7 races. But with Fabio Quartararo, you just don't expect him to make any mistakes, especially after what happened in 2020 with the title fight. You know, last season he was ruthless, he was dominant, and I mean, I'm sorry I didn't talk about IndyCar more, but to be honest, I haven't been able to watch all the IndyCar races this year because some of them have been held quickly on, and I know a lot more about MotoGP, so sorry to all the people tuning in for the IndyCar, because I just don't know enough about it. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think Fabio's got the title in his pocket. But now we move on to the Moto2, and it was a very, very good affair for Ayogura, as he won the race. He had a very good little fight at the end of the race with Somkat Chantra, his teammate, and right at the end of the race there was a lovely battle between Augusto Fernandez, Pedro Acosta, Jake Dixon and Aaron Canet for 3rd place, and in the end Dixon came out on top, finishing in 3rd place. And the reason for this was because yet again Celestino Vietti made a mistake and fell off from 3rd place. And in the Moto2 standings, it is currently looking as though Agura has control of this, because he has been really consistent as of late. But so is Augusto Fernandez. So to be fair, I wouldn't say the title fight is over just yet. It's only 1 point between the two of them, and anything can happen in Moto2, and often it does. And Vietti's not out of it either. I mean, the gap is 27 points, but if one of those two falls off, if both of them fall off and Vietti wins, then he's instantly right back in that fight, and that could happen, you know. I think Vietti's got a ride next year anyway, personally speaking. I think what's going to happen is, I think Zarco could get sacked. I think what will happen is the dominoes will fall into place. So, because Miller's gone to KTM, I reckon Bastianini's going to move up to there, to the factory Ducati. Also, another thing I forgot to mention, Jorge Martin finished 10th despite falling off. Pretty impressive. He only lost 15 seconds. And if he hadn't lost those 15 seconds, he actually would have gotten a podium, probably. Because he lost around about 15 seconds. But yeah, what I was going to say was, before I interrupted myself, was Bastianini's going to go to Ducati, meaning that the next space open will be the seat that goes to Gresini, and I think that that's where Vietti's going to end up. And then when it comes to HRC, I believe so Rins is going to go to LCR Honda, and I think his teammate is going to be Ogura. Ogura said, I'm not going to go into MotoGP next year, but look at his form. He's first in the championship at the moment. He's a fantastic young rider. So I think he will be the one that ends up in MotoGP next year. So I think Taka Nakagami is going to be out of his seat. I'm sorry, Takanaka fans, but I think that's what's going to happen. Also, Remy Gardner is going to be without a seat. That means Augusto Fernandez is definitely going to take his place. And then Darren Binder is going to lose his seat, meaning potentially, I'm just looking at it now, could there be Aaron Canet maybe, or will it just be the case of Binder leaves and then there's a whole bunch of switches? I don't know. What we do know is that Alex Marquez certainly ain't going to be, I don't think he's going to be in a seat next year, is he? So, I mean, I try and look at the 2023 page, but it doesn't exist on Wikipedia. So, yeah. So that's sort of me summing up the MotoGP and Moto2. I can't really sum up the Moto3 because I didn't actually watch it. Long story short, because I was up so late watching the IndyCar, I didn't wake up on time to actually watch the Moto3. Guilty as charged. And who really cares about the Moto E, to be honest? Let's be honest, I mean, they're not publicising it enough. What I did say to myself in the shower the night before, though, was that Holgado, Moreira and Munoz were all going to do decently, and they all did get decent results, because they've all had really good rookie seasons. I think Munoz is a champion in the making, because I think he has a lot of talent. He's gotten 2 podiums in his first 6 races, and Moreira's been quite consistent when he's not been falling off as well. He got pole in Silverstone. Holgato has been consistent as well, 2 6th places and an 8th. You know, these guys, they're beating some very experienced riders, and they're doing a solid job. Scott Ogden's doing alright, and Ivan Artola's been good. But I think out of all of them, the best rookie's been David Munoz by far, because he has been fantastic to watch as a rider. He's just been really good. But that's sort of me summing up all that. And now we're going to move on to my favourite segment, which is History Corner. So, last time out, we had a look at the 1930s and the 1920s in Formula 1, or as it was known as back then, just simply Grand Prix racing, and how Hitler, in fact, had gotten involved in racing before he decided to invade Poland. Rest in peace, all those who were lost in the war, including many of my family, and many of my future in-laws. Shout out to my girlfriend Amelia. But yeah, we'll talk a bit about the first Formula 1 season, because we've got a lot of information on that. So, let's simply start off with how Formula 1 actually came about. So, I don't know if I went over this last time, but after the war, Formula 1 started. There was two Formula 1 races in 1946, and then it became regulated in 1948. But then in 1949, the Fédération Internationale de Automobile, aka the FIA, announced that a series would take place the following year, just 1 year after MotoGP and NASCAR were both formed. And the first ever Grand Prix was held at Silverstone, and on pole for the race was Nino Farina, and he set a pole time of a 1 minute 50.8 around the Silverstone circuit, which is still raced on today, albeit with a much different layout. Some of the corners that still exist today include Maggotts Beckett's Chapel. In fact, nearly the whole track still exists technically, because all the corners on this track are still used in the modern Formula 1. So basically, Abbey is turn 1 in real life at the moment, and Club was not a chicane, it was a right hand bend. So all the corners that are on the Silverstone track are still there today, but because they didn't want 3-minute lap times, it was quite a shorter track. And some people that attended included King George, the Queen Mother, and Princess Margaret. So that was interesting. But on pole for the race, like I said, was Nino Farina, and he outqualified Luigi Fagioli by 0.2 of a second. Oh, sorry for the noise in the background, guys. My bad. And in third was Juan Manuel Fangio, and the Alfa Romeos were dominant. There was quite a few different manufacturers in this series. There was Alfa Romeo, Maserati, Talbot, ERA, and Alta. That's 5 manufacturers, and Alfa Romeo was by far the best. They took 1, 2, 3, and 4 in qualifying, and the top 3 were separated by 0.4 of a second. 3 of the best drivers in the world at that point, and 2 of the best pre-war, Fangio and Fagioli. Fangio was so great that Jean-Pierre Vermeil, one of the great war drivers, pre-war drivers, said that once he got a good car, he would be able to do wonderful things. And in this race, he was on fire. He fought with Farina until the lead, until he retired on lap 62 with an oil pipe issue. So that meant surely Farina was going to win, and he did by 2.6 seconds by Luigi Fagioli and Reg Parnell. And then, because Reg Parnell was driving the 4th Alfa Romeo and he was the home hero, so he was given a hero's return. And then 4th and 5th were the Talbots, because they were sort of the McLaren and Alpine of this world back in those days. They were basically like Red Bull in 2020. They just picked up the pieces when they could and got points. Well, that was in the first round, but then Monaco came and things were completely different, because a new manufacturer was on the scene called Ferrari. And also, there were some new drivers, such as Alberto Ascari, Raymond Sommer, Luis Chiron, well, he wasn't new obviously, and Jose Frolian Gonzalez. And these guys actually gave Alfa Romeo a good fight for their buck, a good run for their money basically. But Fangio was on pole, and he outqualified Farina by 2.6 seconds around the streets of Monaco. A track which is only 1.9 miles long. Oh, hang on, was it 1.9 miles long? Yeah, it was 1.9 miles long. It was basically the exact same circuit that it is today, except for the chicane, the Nouvelle chicane, being basically a flat-out kink, and the last corner being a hairpin rather than Rasgas and then Anthony Noche. The rest of the track is near enough identical. But yeah, another new team that arrived was Cooper as well, and also Simca. Simca qualified 11th and 13th with Robert Manzon and Maurice Trintignant, and Cooper qualified 20th with the hands of Harry Schell, although he didn't set a time. Actually, he was just allowed to race. I don't know why. But As I said, Farina was second, third was Jose Fernando Gonzalez, and fourth, the oldest F1 driver statistically of all time, in Philippe Tanslin, as he was born in December 1896. Yes, he was 53 years old when he did this race. But at the very start of this race, there was a huge crash. Thankfully everyone was okay, but there was not one, not two, not three, 4, 5, 6, or 7, or 8, but 9 cars that were out on the first lap, 8 of which had something to do with the opening lap crash. And what happened was heading into the tobacco corner, I believe it was, a bunch of water came onto the track, and the only driver to have really noticed this was Fangio. And needless to say, Fangio was an incredible driver, so he noticed it and slowed down slightly. But then came Farina through there, and do you know what happened? He spun. And as a result, Fagioli, Rosier, Louis Rosier, Robert Manzon, Tullio de Graffenried in the Maserati, Trintignant, Cuth Harrison, Franco Roll, and Harry Schell all were eliminated. I think Harry Schell was in a different incident. And then the following lap, Gonzalez retired as well. And this basically meant that Fangio had already won the race, because all the other Alfa Romeos were out, and he ended up winning by a lap from the debutants Ferrari, as Alberto Ascari finished second on his first F1 race, basically doing something his father would be very proud of. And third was Louis Chiron, becoming the only monogasque driver in Formula 1 history to be on the podium. Of course, Chiron had won the race 19 years previously, back in 1931, I believe, or was it 1933? Let me just quickly do a VAR check on that. He won it in 1931, like I thought. I was just doing a quick check of that. By the way, I'd like to very quickly point out, people were talking about how good my knowledge is. I'm reading this off of Wikipedia. My knowledge is good, but it's not that good to remember the exact... I mean, I can remember the podium results of the race, but I can't remember how many cars were eliminated and who was eliminated. But yeah, fourth was Raymond Sommer, and this was his best result in Formula 1 before he lost his life in an accident in 1950. I believe he was doing a hill climb event. And then fifth was Prince Bira, the first of 2 Thai F1 drivers, the last of which is currently on the grid in Alex Albon. So at this point in the championship, it is all square at the top. Fangio and Farina are tied on points for the lead, and Fagioli and Ascari are tied for third, because Fagioli had one retirement and had finished second, and Ascari didn't attend the first round and finished second. Farina and Fangio each had a win and a retirement. And then we had Indianapolis, but no one really cares about that. And then we had the Swiss Grand Prix at Bremgarten. Yes, shock twist, there was a Swiss Grand Prix. And on pole yet again was Fangio around the 5-mile circuit? 4.5 mile circuit. And he was 7/10 ahead of Farina, which is actually quite close considering it was a 4.5 mile circuit, because of how slow these cars were. But Fangio was just really good in qualifying. And these two were in a league of their own. Fagioli was 2.4 seconds slower than Farina. And just behind him were 2 Ferraris in the debutant of Luigi Villoresi and another Italian in Alberto Ascari. And in the end, it was Farina that won, because Fangio yet again hit mechanical problems as he retired on lap 32 with an engine issue. And all the Ferraris retired as well, as on lap 4, Ascari retired with an oil pump problem, on lap 9, Villoresi retired with an engine problem, and on lap 19, Sommer retired with suspension issues. Meaning that Farina and Fagioli were clean to finish first and second, and third in the end was Rosier. Like I said, Talbot were the best of the rest, unless you count Ferrari being close to Alfa Romeo, and unless you count Ferrari being a bit further away from Alfa Romeo. Fourth was Bira, taking back-to-back points, and fifth was Felice Veneto, getting his first points in Formula 1. So at this point in the standings, Farina led on 18 points, and second was Fagioli on 12 points. Third was Juan Manuel Fangio on 9 points, tied with Johnny Parsons, although I don't really count the Indy 500 as a round. And 5th was Louis Rosier, who was now tied with Alberto Ascari due to his consistent results. And then 8th was Prince Bira, with 5 points due to his also consistent results. Parnell and Chiron had managed to get 4 points due to their podiums, but hadn't achieved any other points finishes, and Raymond Sommer and Giro Cabanto were in 12th, thanks to their, again, consistent results. And like I said, Veneto took home his first points and was 15th in the championship. So, that's us halfway through the season now, which is crazy to think. And then they headed to Spa for the Belgian Grand Prix in June. So, it was Farina that was on pole, and unfortunately they didn't actually get the right times. So what happened was they timed it by the second, not the tenths. So basically, Farina got pole, but Fangio might have. I don't really know though. I mean, they might have done it well. However, there was only 14 cars that actually entered at the Belgian Grand Prix, as Talbot, Alta, Maserati, Ferrari and Alfa Romeo took part. That's only, 5 teams? Maserati, Talbot, Alta, Ferrari, yeah, that's only 5 teams. And it was a 1-2-3 in qualifying yet again for Alfa Romeo, with Farina and Fangio setting a time within a second of each other. And then Fagioli was 4 seconds behind them, and then it was Villoresi and Ascari on the outside of a Sommer Itanzaline sandwich, as it was Villoresi 4th, Alberto Ascari 7th, and then the Talbots, the Sommer and the Itanzaline in 5th and 6th, as Sommer had moved to Talbot for this round of the season. Talbot actually had 7 cars in the race, as 8th to 11th were Louis Rosier, Giro Cabantu, Pierre Levesque, I'll talk about him in a few episodes' time, Eugene Chabot, and then 12th was Jeffrey Crossley, 13th was Tony Brancat and the only Maserati, and then Johnny Claes at his home Grand Prix didn't actually set a time. And in the end, things went Fangio's way this time, as he won from Fagioli and Rosier, as Farina actually did finish the race, unlike Fangio the previous round, and he finished 4th, and 5th was Alberto Ascari. There were only 4 retirements from this race, as 4 Talbots broke down, Cabantu with an oil pipe issue on lap 2, and Chabot with the same on lap 22, and then Itanzaline on lap 15 with overheating problems, and Sommer on lap 20 with oil pressure issues. Johnny Claes finished 8th at his home race, maybe next year Johnny, and now it was a little bit closer in the championship, as Farina led by 4 points from Fagioli and 5 from Fangio, as they headed into the penultimate round of the season. And the penultimate round of the season was the French Grand Prix, Talbot's home race, and the home race for several drivers on the grid. Do you want me to give you an exact number? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 drivers on the grid were at their home event. And because of how long the French Grand Prix circuit was, 4.8 miles, the gaps were quite huge in qualifying, as the difference between Fangio in 1st and Levesque in 9th was 18.4 seconds. Interesting. However, Ferrari withdrew from the race. I don't know why, I'll need to check. They withdrew in practice for some reason. So as a result, the only Ferrari in the race was Peter Whitehead's Ferrari, and he was starting dead last on the grid. However, despite this, he finished 3rd in the race. And the reason for this was because Farina retired from 2nd place, well that's where he started anyway, with a fuel pump issue on lap 55. And because he was in a Ferrari, he was quicker than the Simca Gordini car and the Talbots, and as a result he was able to finish on the podium in the end. So Fangio won from Fagioli, who took yet another 2nd place finish, and is still yet to win a race this season. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. That's how Formula 1 goes. And then 3rd was Whitehead, taking a podium in his, I believe, his first F1 race. No, his 2nd Formula 1 race. And at this point in the season, now, Fangio led as they headed into the final round, and Fagioli was 2nd, and 3rd was Farina. So heading into the final round, Farina is the underdog. Rosier is in 4th with 10 points, and then Parsons is in 5th with 9, although, again, I don't really count Indy as a round. So in my opinion, 5th is Ascari with 8 points, and then 6th is Prince Biro with 5, and then Chiron and Parnell are both on 4, as is Whitehead, as they've all scored a 3rd place, but haven't scored points since then, And right at the bottom are Chabot and Itanceline as they headed into the final round in Italy. As the all-European circus came to Monza, it was Fangio that was on pole position for the race. And heading into the round for Fangio, he needed to finish second to guarantee the title. And he needed to hope that he could finish in the points and that Farina did not win. Because if that happened, Farina wouldn't be world champion. But then for Fagioli, it would be for him to win, and for Farina to be third or lower, and for Fangio not to score any points. Farina would need the fastest lap, and Fangio third, for him to hope and pray for the title. And in the race, it started off well for Farina, as he took the lead right off the start, and, Ascari was the only one to break his dominance, as he led all but 2 laps of the race, as Ascari led lap 14 and lap 15. And thankfully for Farina, Fangio retired on lap number 23 with a gearbox problem. And the amount of drivers that were in this race was crazy. 27 entries, which is crazy compared to 14 at Spa. Some of the drivers on that grid include the likes of Fangio, and Ascari actually qualified second place at the track where he would lose his life 5 years later. That will be in another episode, probably 4 or 5 episodes down the line. Giuseppe Farina was in third for Alfa Romeo on the grid, and then fourth was Consalvo Sanesi, out-qualifying his much more experienced teammate Luigi Fagioli. Piero Taruffi was seventh for Alfa Romeo on his debut, and Rino Serafini managed to qualify sixth on his debut for Ferrari. The Italian manufacturers really wanted a lot of cars, so in the end, Maserati ended up having 6 or 7 cars on the grid. Let me just count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cars. And this race was odd because it's the only time a Ferrari has been entered without a Ferrari engine, as Clemente Biondetti fitted a Jaguar engine to the back of his Ferrari, but qualified only 25th. So in the end, Italy got what they wanted, an all-Italian podium, as Nino Farina won the World Championship, following Fangio's retirement on lap 23, despite him winning the fastest lap point, and him actually having a shared drive with Piero Taruffi, as Taruffi gave him his car to finish the race, but he too retired on lap 34. In second place was the shared drive of Dorino Serafini. This would be his only Formula 1 race, and he would become the only driver to have a 100% podium rate. The closest was the man in third, being Luigi Fagioli, as Serafini shared a drive with Ascari for second, and Talbot had a strong end to the season, getting 5 points, with Rosier in fourth, and fifth was Itanceline. So the first ever world champion was Giuseppe Farina, winning the championship by only 3 points from Fangio, who was a further 3 points ahead of Fagioli. In the end, Ascari finished fifth for Ferrari, but Rosier got the crown of best of the rest by finishing on 13 points with 2 podiums. So, I guess this is the end of the episode. We've been going for 37 minutes now, and I'd like to thank you all very much for the support on the first episode of the podcast, and I will see you all for the next episode. So thank you all very much for watching. This will probably be going out on Tuesday because it's 8 o'clock my time. Sorry for filming it so late. But anyway, I will see you all in the next episode. Thank you all for watching, and this is Talking Racing Nonsense. Keep racing.